to tell you a little bit about our Comeback to Christ event that is happening March 28th and 29th in St. George, Utah at the Black Hill Event Center. Saturday is already sold out, but we did add Friday. It's an evening event, so it's a condensed version of the event, and we'll have some awesome speakers as well as a panel, so you'll be able to ask some questions. There are a few tickets left, so you're going to want to hurry and get tickets if you are interested in coming. And then also wanted to shout out our amazing sponsors. We could not have put this event on without our sponsors. The tickets are donation based, so the sponsors are really what is making this happen. Mike from mikesAutoShack.com, he is so awesome, and he's been going to the dealer only auction in Las Vegas, and he purchases newer vehicles, some with full factory warranties. He does this for $1,500 above the price of the car. So you can learn all about his auto buying business and how it can save you thousands of dollars by going to his website, mikesAutoShack.com. And then one of our other sponsors is A to Z ISP, and he's an IT consultant and a source for business IT infrastructure needs, from internet and phones, payment processing, all the things. So if you're looking for that, go get in touch with A to Z ISP for all of your business tech needs. Brent, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. I read your email. Actually, Jenna is the one that suggested that we get you on ASAP. And so I went through and I read your email, and it was really cool. It's interesting for me to be interviewing a police officer on my podcast because for so many years I was so terrified of police officers. And so it's funny because I was, on the other side of things for so long, and I just lived my life just so afraid of police officers for so long. So it's really cool to have a police officer on podcast. And yeah, so I'm just really excited to have you on, and your story's amazing. And I'm excited to hear all the details. So thank you for joining.
No, thanks for having me. I actually you had a police officer on a little while ago,
I did, yes.
and he's a buddy of mine. And so
Really?
after I heard him on the podcast, I shot him a text and I was like, "Hey, did I hear you on coverage?" He's like, "Yeah, you did." I'm like, "Okay, I like that," because it can be a brutal profession. You know, with what happened with me, a lot of it was because of that stigma.
Yeah.
And man, we attach stigmas to so many things. Everything that I've gone through, realizing that there are a lot of others that have gone through it too. And once you hear one person say it, it's stupid, but it's almost like you now have permission to share your story. It's really weird how we think. I mean, we're so type A personality, but something like that it really gets to us.
My dad was in the FBI, and my uncle was in the FBI a lot longer than my dad was. My dad actually got out of the FBI when I was just little, but my uncle he just barely wrote a book about his experience being in the FBI, and I haven't read it yet, but I mean, it's evident that, what police officers and people in the FBI, it is a sacrifice. Like, you are sacrificing your peace of mind. You are sacrificing so much to be public servants. And so, yeah, it's pretty incredible.
A buddy of mine said, it's turned into one of my favorite quotes, but he said, when you're called to defend humanity, you're robbed of it yourself.
Wow.
And it was like the most profound thing that I've heard in a long time. And he just kind of said it off the cuff. And I was like, wait, what did you say? And he goes, well, when you're called to defend humanity, expect to be robbed of it. And I was just like, wow.
Yeah. Well, so excited that you're able to use your experience and share it and help people. So would love to jump in and get started from the beginning.
You got it. Grew up in a small town. My dad was the bishop, which led me to have to joke around all the time. My faith was never challenged. I never had, growing up in the 80s and early 90s, we didn't have the things that pull on the youth today. Went on a mission, started out in Chile, got really sick. They sent me home, wouldn't release me to go back out of the country. And so the first time that it really struck me that I had to make a decision was when I had to decide whether to go back out or not. I was almost my year mark, and I didn't have to go through that on deciding to go on a mission. It was just, I just always knew that I was going to go. I never had to think about it. And, 2 months in the MTC, didn't think anything of it, loved every minute of it. And in fact, it didn't really even hit me until the plane is descending down into Santiago. And it was an overnight flight. It was a long flight. And the plane's descending. We're coming in over the Andes. And I just kind of sit up and I'm like, oh, this is real. And that was the first moment, but it still didn't faze me. I didn't get homesick. And so that was my first thing, was deciding to go back out, and I'm glad that I did. I actually ended up serving in Pennsylvania and served with my wife's brother. So, we never would have met had I not gone. And then I got into policing. Went through the academy. It was really stupid, but I had never really been challenged before. When I first started, I mean, my training officer was like, kind of the chit chat, getting to know you. And he goes, "So are you Mormon?" And I'm so weak, but I was like, well, I mean, technically, and I was going to church. I mean, there was nothing that was shocking, but I was like, yeah. I mean, I used to go, because in the beginning, like, I thought I had to pick between being a good member of the church or being a good cop. I didn't comprehend in my mind that being good at one would make me better at the other. It was just a weakness, and I was still going. And then as the job goes, I mean, things happen. I stopped going for a little while, and my I remember my daughter. I think she was like 3 or 4, and I was in the gang unit at the time, and I was working narcotics in the gang unit, and so it was kind of a quasi undercover, and I had, big long beard. She came up and she was like, "Dad, why don't you go to church with us?" And I'm like, "Okay, fine, I'll go." And so you go in, and despite having lived in the ward for a few years, get introduced as the new guy. And because I looked how I looked, um, and at first I wasn't sure, am I offended because people are, kind of giving me that look? And then I was like, you're not the type of person that gets offended. And then it was just, well, you look the part. And I'm like, oh, okay. So it's actually a compliment. And that's how I kind of, spun things in my mind. It still wasn't a big deal. And then I had a couple of things happen that just set me up for a long road. One of the first ones, I never had a problem with the word of wisdom. I mean, I had friends in high school. I mean, they did, but it was never something that enticed me. And a group of us, we went out to DC, and we were staying at my buddy's parents' house, and there was a mistake of identifying the bottle, and I didn't know what I was drinking, and I threw it back, and it burned the whole way down. And I'm like, that burns. And they're like, yeah, that's alcohol. And my friends were really good. I mean, they never pressured me. They knew I didn't drink. They never pressured me to. Everything was fine. My friend's mom, she goes, well, yeah, it's alcohol. And I'm like, but they said it was non-alcoholic. And she goes, well, yeah, in Virginia you can't give a sample of an alcoholic beverage. I'm like, and everybody was kind of laughing, and I was kind of laughing, but inside I was like, that was my first real failure, which, and I get in today's world, people are like, that's your failure? And I'm like, but to me it was a big thing. When the devil gets you in your ear, and at first it's hey, it's not a big deal, it's not a big deal, you do the act, and all of a sudden he's like, how could you have done that? Now there's no way of going back. And so that started a period of time of, well, I guess let's see what this is all about. And that preceded an event that happened on our task force, and because I had basically stepped away, I had shut myself off from the comfort of the spirit to help me get through that. And I bounced back a little bit. And then I had a good friend of mine that was shot and killed, and I was there. I went with him to the hospital, and they couldn't save him, and it started a spiral. That was in September of 2013, and by the time the following May, when we put his name on memorial in DC, and things just started to go south. I was getting more agitated, more closed off, um, still in a bit of denial about what was happening to me. I was short with my wife and kids, and it just kept getting worse. And I'd stopped going to church probably right after we got back. So after Derek was killed, I was assigned to narcotics. In June, we started a pretty big case. We took it up to DEA, and I was the case agent on it, and it was a substantial investigation. After Derek was killed, like I stopped praying, stopped reading scriptures, so I'm really setting myself up uh, for a domino effect. And it was never anything, you know. I have no issues with any of the doctrines or history of the church. I've never been one of those guys that questions anything. Um, you know, people call it blind loyalty or whatever, and I'm like, okay, I don't care. I mean, that's just how I am. I mean, the prophet can get up and say something, and I'm like, okay, that's how it is, you know. And so my issues were never doctrine. It was it was me. It was who I felt I had become, and that there wasn't a place for me, and not through anybody else's actions, but from my own. How my wife didn't slit my throat in the middle of the night, I don't know. I spent months like expecting her to kick me out, and I'm figuring out, okay, I'm going to get taken in alimony and child support. I'm another statistic. I'm all of these things, and it it was bad. I kind of get to that point where I I was never suicidal, but I was to the point that I understood it. You know, I had notions about it. I had, you know, a couple of guys that I worked with that they killed themselves, and I had an opinion about that, you know, and it was one about that selfish. It's da, da, da. And I had hit a point where I was like, it's not selfish. You know, they think they're doing a very selfless thing. And even though I wasn't at the point where I was ready to do that to myself, I was like, I got it. And
Do you think like the root of this was what you were seeing and going through at work? Do you think it was you like distancing yourself from the spirit? Was it just a culmination of all of those things together? Like where was the root of all of this pain?
um, both, both. I think it's something where you know, we see things that the human mind weren't meant to see and to try and process it, and then walking away from the gospel just took the. I mean, it was like not being a very good swimmer and taking off your life jacket and saying, you know, hey, I don't need it. You know, and the waves are huge. You're out in the middle of everything, and you're like, you know, I probably wasn't meant to have it, which is a really stupid thing to look back on. But that's where I was at. I mean, that's what went through my head. I knew I was in a bad spot. I didn't know how to get out of it. Because I was the case agent on that case, I got to schedule myself for all the overtime, which conveniently I scheduled all of the Sundays and all the Saturdays. I was having panic attacks, you know, the the nightmares, the everything. But the one place I felt safe was at work, and so work was where I wanted to be. I figured that that's where I was safe, and that nobody knew what was going on. And one of my best friends was actually my narcotics partner, and would be driving around and he'd try having these conversations with me. And I'd just look at him like, what, what are you talking about? Like these, just kind of these off the wall things. And he'd kind of leave it. Come to find out later that he's trying to figure out he's trying to help me. But one of the things they never teach us in the profession is how to do that. So he's trying his best. My wife had talked to him and trying to figure out what was going on with me, and so that was he was doing his best to try and figure that out. I forgot to schedule myself on a Sunday morning. I either forgot or it was blocked from me, and so my wife goes with the kids to church. I'm at home, and I'm just like, okay, I'm just gonna get in the shower. I was in a dark place when I got in the shower. Something happened in there that even 10 years later, try and wrap my head around. But it was just the emptiest, loneliest feeling that I never even thought it was possible to sink to that level of despair. And it felt like I was being dominated by evil. All I could do was just sink to the floor of the shower. And I just sobbed. I don't remember trying to pray or anything. It was just it's like I'm hitting a mental panic button. And I don't remember what happened after that. And I don't remember getting out of the shower. I don't remember getting dressed. I don't remember anything. I remember laying in on the bed, trying to process what happened and trying to ignore it and override it. And there's a knock at the door. And I hear a voice, as plain as you and me talking. I said, go answer the door, it's the bishop. So I did, and it was. And I tried playing it off. I was like, hey, you're supposed to be at church. And we were friends before he became bishop. And he comes in, and I tried saying, how I'm just really busy. And that's all it took. And I crumbled. And we talked for a few hours about everything. And it was him that suggested counseling. He asked how long it had been since I had taken the sacrament. And it had been probably close to 5 or 6 months at that point. He goes, we're gonna do it right now. And so I went and got everything. And I remember as we were talking, I remember feeling a literal weight come off my shoulders. It was a little confusing to me because, you always hear the metaphor of a weight off your shoulders. To have that literally happen, it was really unusual for me. As he said the prayers, like tears were just, in that moment, I'd experienced the atonement like I didn't know existed. I thought it was just for, just for sin. And, I had my share of that, but that was the first time that I realized that it was for so much more. And I remember coming out of that and starting therapy and everything through that and getting onto the other side of this whole storm and looking back and seeing how far I had fallen, and it scared me. But I had a couple of realizations that I didn't fall as far as a lot of guys fall. And if that's what I went through at that level, I can't imagine the horror and trauma that goes through guys that go to such a deeper level of despair. My wife, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her. Our family wouldn't be together if it wasn't for her. I owe her everything. And I decided at that point, never again. I will never put myself in a position where I walk away from the Spirit, or where I walk away from anything that God's blessed me with. It's been a really remarkable turn of events. I'm in young men's now, and with the teacher's quorum, I tell them once I'm like, hey, you know what? I'll bring candy, I'll bring treats, I don't care. We can goof around in class, we can goof around on Wednesdays, whatever. I said, but on Sundays I need 30 minutes from you. and I need 30 minutes of your absolute best, and being able to explain the importance of that ordinance that I didn't appreciate before. I certainly didn't appreciate it when I was their age, and so I've got to give it to them. I had a friend of mine that we were talking one day, and she was actually the one that turned me on to your podcast. Came home, we were at a church activity, and came home and told my wife about it, and we started listening as we drive down to work. It's just amazing in today's world how resilient some people are, because I wasn't. I want to be that person. When I say never again, I mean, it doesn't mean that it's easy. It's not like flipping a switch and going, well, I said I was never going to do it again, and so or I was never going to fall or never going to stumble, and magically all the time in the world to study scriptures appears, and plenty of time to go to the temple, everything like that. I mean, if anything, the schedule packs up a little bit more, and so it's that constant reminder and that constant working at it to make sure, because I can't go through that again. When I talk to people that are kind of on that leading edge of doing it, and I tell them, like, there is nothing good on that side. I've been there. Take my word for it. There's nothing good. And so it's just stay over here, and in whatever boring world you think it is, because it's not what you think over there.
My husband and I are missionaries in the 12 step. We started in the pornography one, but now we're in the general addiction. So it's like any addiction, and we are in this big group. There's a lot of people there, and like to see where they're at, like when you were talking just barely about how it's not like everything's perfect, but the realization that I've had is that, my problems that I deal with today, like when you're able to face your problems with the Spirit and with Heavenly Father's help, and you're not facing all the problems that come with life on your own, there's such a drastic difference in what that feels like and what that looks like to go through life with the Spirit as opposed to not having the Spirit. And when you were talking about that, it reminded me of that. And, and I see that in these meetings that I go to all the time, where people are, they're fresh. They're very fresh in their addiction, whether it be one day sober or a couple weeks or whatever. And it's so incredible to see how once you can open your heart to the Savior. And I love what you were saying about, like, the atonement isn't just for like these deep, dark sins. It's for when we're feeling broken inside. Like maybe we're not like drowning in sin, but when we're feeling broken inside, that is what the Savior's atonement is for, is to heal us no matter whatever the brokenness looks like, or whether it's sin or whatever. And it's a really beautiful thing to experience. And it doesn't matter if it's something like super drastic on the outside, or maybe it's you said something at work that you shouldn't have said, and you have like this, you feel so bad. The Savior's atonement is for all of that. It's all encompassing. It doesn't matter what it is. That's what's so beautiful about the gospel and about Jesus Christ, is that we can be made new, and we can start over, and it can be like it didn't happen.
I also realized um like the benefit of when President Nelson came out and said, the repent daily. I'm like, how about hourly? Just or every 15 minutes, for a while. And that's what I realized. I was after going through all of this, I was a better cop. I had learned an empathy that that I didn't know existed in me, and I realized that most people are good, even when they're doing stuff that they're not. And that's when I realized that a lot of people going through things that led them to deal with us was partially from them being broken too, and this is how they cope with that being broken. And so I wasn't in a different place than they were. My outlet was different than theirs, but that brokenness was still the same. And I really learned from my last few years before I retired, was that there are three types of people that we deal with. There are the victims of crime, there are the perpetrators of crime, and then there are predators. Drawing that distinction and focusing on those that prey on, and I had a number of informants, working narcotics that were preyed upon. They were facing addiction. Some of it was addiction while being sex trafficked, and and forced into that lifestyle, and then the addiction takes over. Others seem to feel like they had a predisposition to addiction. There was a distinct difference in people in that situation and those that were just the predators. And the predators had just that feel of evil. Working narcotics became about helping those people out of it. It wasn't so much, getting a stat or lining them in jail. It was doing what we could to get them out of it. Like we're pulling people from a burning building. Is kind of what it felt like at times. And and I think a lot of times we lose focus of what our abilities are in the profession. We have those risks, and we have like you were saying as we were getting started about having that fear of police. And the one thing that I can tell you and I trained thousands of cops over my career. There were some that I could see that with, where I'm like, I wouldn't want to get pulled over by, because just that attitude. But I would say the overwhelming majority are looking for the opportunity to do good. They say that the average person will see a traumatic event, I think, 3 or 4 times in their life. And most cops will witness anywhere between 200 and 800. That's a lot to take on.
Mm-hmm.
And taking it on without the gospel, I don't understand. I know that there are guys that do it. I don't see how. They're probably a lot stronger and better than I am, because I tried doing it without, and it wrecked me. That's why I say never, never, ever again. And that's one of the things that I constantly pray for is don't let me do that again. I don't even want to start in that general direction.
The irony is not lost on me right now that there's a former heroin addict that was in jail for 4 months and been arrested many, many times, interviewing a retired narcotics police officer. And in my mind, I'm thinking, isn't it the most beautiful thing in the whole world how God can work all these things together? And we're sitting here and we're talking about the gospel, and it's so incredible how he can take all these things that we go through, all of these hard things, and he can work them together for something so beautiful. And I know that there's so many people that need to hear your story. And I mean, what you were saying about the police officers and how, a lot of them, they just want to do good. And I got pulled over like a year ago, maybe, because I was speeding. I got in all my trouble was in St. George. And, it was a little triggering for me. I've been, at the time was sober for 10 years, but, anytime I get pulled over by a St. George police officer, man, it's a little scary for me. And she comes up and she's like, you're an alcohol restricted driver. And I was like, oh gosh, what is that? Like, I don't know what this means. And I was like, yes, like I did have lots of legal trouble back in the day. But I've been sober now for, at the time it was about 10, 11 years. And she goes, you can actually you can get that removed now. Like you can actually, the time has passed. Like your record is like clean ever since then. I don't even know if I've gotten a speeding ticket since then. And she says, you should get that like removed now. And it was such a cool experience for me. And I told her, I'm like, I'm sober. Like I actually not worried about being an alcohol restricted driver because I do not drink alcohol, but it was that I felt like she was kind of like advocating for me in that moment. And it was such a turn. It was like so different from what I had been used to for so long. But it was really cool to see how, I don't know, like I felt like she was advocating for me. It wasn't like, I see your record. You've done a lot of naughty things. So one question I have for you is, what advice would you have for somebody that, maybe they are retired and maybe they're still dealing with all of the trauma that comes with, maybe it's just life in general. Like, what has your experience been? You mentioned that you have gone through counseling. What has your experience been like in receiving help for that and also like working that with the gospel?
Um, Obviously the first thing is get into counseling, and recognizing that not all counselors are the same. And so finding somebody that can relate to you and understand you, and not let you get away with stuff, willing to call you on it. The counselor that I went through right after all of that, he was a member. He was able to work gospel principles into it, and it laid a really good foundation for me. And after I went through it, I thought it was like a check the box. Okay, I went through 23 weeks of counseling. Okay, I'm good to go. No more problems ever. And things still come up. I go back every now and then, and currently with some things that story that I told you about before, everything, like all of those, creeping back in. Now I know how to deal with it. My wife knows ways to intervene. The biggest thing is, when I was going through it, I thought I was on an island. I thought it was just me. Nobody else would understand. I was on the phone with a buddy of mine the first time I went to counseling, and I'm like, I can't go in there. I mean, the counseling center was on the same road as the police department, further down the street. I'm like, I can't go in. And he's like, why not? I'm like, somebody's going to see me. And he goes, somebody driving down Redwood Road at 60 miles an hour is going to glance over and see the door that you're walking through. And I'm like, yeah. It took 20 minutes of him coaxing me through the door. And he was like, do I need to come down there and kick your butt through the door? I'm like, yeah, you actually might. And once I got in, it was it was all downhill from there. And I knew that that's where I needed to be. I felt like I was the only one going through it. On a level, knowing that others have gone through it, but like those were my special circumstances. There were a lot of things that I hadn't really dealt with. For example, one was in October of 2000. There was a guy and his wife. They had lost their minds. They broke into the South Jordan Temple, and with their kids, and they pushed past the security guard, which is this little old guy, and he said, in pushing past him, told the kids that they were going to meet Jesus that day. So we had geared up what we were sure was going to happen, and so we knew that we had to find them. We had an entire South Valley response. And out of that group, there were only 3 of us that were endowed members. We knew where they were going to be, and so we took our team and we went straight to the slush room, and that's where we found them. I'd never felt such rage, because everything that they had was, that it looked like he was holding a knife to his son's throat. Experiencing that, knowing that you're about to put a bullet through the head of a guy in the temple, and as he turns, his hand comes away, and it wasn't a knife, and I was so enraged, and I holstered up and we got close, and I didn't realize I did it, but I guess I took his 8-year-old and just shoved him to the side, and the fight was on. And it was a straight up fight with evil. I mean, this guy he was small, but he had a strength that was just, there were a lot of factors that went into it where I'm like, this guy's straight up possessed. And I struggled with that. Any other building, any other time, no problem with anything that we did. I mean, we ended up putting him down hard, and it was a fight the entire way. And they had to clean blood off the carpet because I put it there. And so all of these things, and it just builds. And I go, okay, I can get through that, and then something else happens, and then that builds, and then it builds, and it builds, and it builds. And thinking that after you retire that it just goes away, it doesn't. It sits there and it festers like a little splinter, and you think there's nothing of it, and then all of a sudden, like, well, you got to amputate your finger because it's infected, and it's the same thing with this. It's not weak to get help. It's weak to think that you can do it alone.
I think that sometimes there's this kind of stigma around getting help from a therapist. And I imagine that in, the police world or the FBI world or any world like that, I imagine that stigma is really prevalent. And I mean, what was it like? Like, I know you mentioned it was really hard to get there. You were worried somebody was going to see you. And I'm sure that took a lot of humility. But like after you started going, did you feel that start to ease up, or did you feel like you were still afraid people were going to find out?
It took me a while. I mean, even though they were going away, I was still having panic attacks, probably through. So I started November 8th, and even around Thanksgiving, I was still, not able to be around crowds, even family, my own family. And right about that time, I told my buddy, and I'm like, he probably didn't notice, but things have been, not good with me. And he starts laughing, and he was like, yeah, you can't hide it. We've known that something's been. And I'm like, you knew? And he goes, yeah, you remember all those weird conversations we were having? And that's when I realized, that he was trying to help. And it was still a while before I could tell anybody. And when the Tribune did that series, when it released in 2018, for the reporter, I signed a waiver to talk to the therapist. And I told the therapist, I said, look, you can talk to him anything except for the church stuff. In fact, and the stuff that I shared earlier, I haven't shared openly before. So he did, and when they released that, I walked into the apartment later that day, and like all morning long, from the time they hit it, getting text messages, Facebook. I mean, probably 1,500 either text messages or Facebook messages, of support. I walk into the agency and it treated me like I was a leper. Buddies of mine that, had gone to lunch the day before and walk down the hall and they avert their glance, like they won't even. And I'm like, really? And it was like I broke some code. In the FOP, we had been pushing a wellness narrative, because agencies just flat out weren't doing it. So we started a foundation and we started covering wellness, and we'd been doing that for about 3 years. We were doing everything that we could to get rid of the stigma. It was just felt like a little bit like a betrayal, and I realized that the guys that were doing that, they were either in denial about their own status, or they hadn't been on long enough to understand the totality of everything that we go through. And it was kind of one of those realizations where I wasn't mad. I was worried about them because I knew that their time was coming. I mean, this isn't something that you just, there is no ignore and override on this. It's just, it'll take your pound of flesh at one point or another. And if you're not ready for it, look out. That old analogy about, the Lord will have a humble people. You can either choose to be humble or you can be compelled.
Yep.
I'm
Yes.
like, I've been compelled and it sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Compulsion and humility is not something that is fun to go through.
In the 12-step meetings in the manual, it says, it's one of the closing lines, and it's one of my favorites. Your presence here demonstrates your humility and inspires hope in every person attending today. And I think that is the same thing with you showing up and being willing to be humble enough to say, hey, I need help with this. Like, this is something I need help with. And I think it demonstrates your humility and it inspires hope. And whether people are openly admitting that or not, it does inspire hope.
I hope so. If one person can get through without letting themselves get to that point, then, you know, it's a win. As the years go by, I talk more and more openly, you know, about it, is because I know that I'm not alone in it. I know the things that I've gone through that other people have gone through, and it may not have been in policing, but it's been in something else. And also that the spiritual experiences that have happened as a result of that others also have. I actually learned to develop a couple of gifts from the Spirit, gifts of the Spirit that I believe were mine, but I had them locked away. Dealing with this experience on this end of it has opened those up. So it's hard to go back and say, you know, I wish I never would have gone through that, you know, because who knows, maybe I would have developed them another way. It's a weird thing to sit there and think back through and wonder if I could have been at the same point that I am today without going through that, because there wasn't anything good about going through that. You know, there wasn't anything good about walking away from the gospel and, you know, abandoning all the principles and everything like that. I don't believe that I was destined to do that. I believe that God knew that I was going to do that and put some things in place. It's like, okay, if you're going to do this, then I'm going to move this here and I'm going to move this here, and I'm going to get you to this end point, because I know that you're going to screw up, and you're going to screw up royally. And that's the beauty of the atonement, is it's like the big safety net. Our podcast that we do it twice a month, and it's called Covered with the Utah FOP. We talk a lot about wellness on it in different ways. We'll bring on different guests. We try and do it on just a wide variety of things. You know, we had a guy on, his name's David DeRocher, and he runs the Other Side Academy. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Other Side Academy,
Yep.
but his story is absolutely fascinating. And he's actually become a good friend. Actually, we were touring his place, and he was kind of talking us through it. And he had one of the guys there, you know, kind of talking to us about some of the other things that they're doing. And I'm looking at this guy, and I'm like, oh, he looks familiar. And when he's done talking, I'm like, hey, what's your name? And he looks at me and he goes, yeah, I thought you looked familiar. I had put him in prison.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm looking at him, I'm like, oh. And he goes, hey, it's all good. He goes, I'm in a better place now. And he goes, if this place would have existed before, he goes, you wouldn't have had the opportunity to put me back. The ability to sit there and to talk to him and see him succeeding in all these things and feeling genuinely happy for him, you know, and the place is full of them. And so we talk about a lot of things like that and have guests on, you know, trying to show the humanity side of things. When you think of justice and mercy, cops get hung up on the justice side a lot. We forget how to be merciful until we're the ones that need it. You know, C.S. Lewis gave a quote on justice and mercy. He said, mercy without feeling the hammer of justice is a fake mercy. And he goes, in order to feel the true value of mercy, you first have to feel the hammer of justice. You know, I look at that and I thought, you know, how profound is that? But what does the hammer of justice look like, and what does it feel like? We have conversations about it all the time, you know, and even looking at through the wellness lens, when we talk about wellness and we talk about therapy and we talk about, you know, guys like Dave and things like that, it's putting ourselves in touch with that mercy side, because the justice side is not our job, you know, and it's instilling that in cops that we're fact finders. You know, that's all we are. You know, we respond on something, we gather it up, we pass it on. The justice is what happens along the way. And as long as we're doing everything with integrity, then that's what matters. We shouldn't care whether somebody gets convicted or not. Even if you put hours and hours and hours and days and months into a case, it shouldn't matter. But when the opportunity for mercy presents itself, I believe that we have an obligation to seize on that. And I don't think the profession requires it. I think our souls require it. And it's a message that resonates with some and doesn't resonate quite yet with others. But just keep at it.
It's so beautiful to me to see all the stories on the podcast, how God works all things to the good of those who love him. Like, you went through such a hard thing. It was so hard, but now here you are telling stories of people who have been through these hard things, or you went through all these hard things yourself, and now you're working on wellness for this specific topic, or breaking the stigma of getting help. And it's not like we would choose to mess up again. It's like, that's how it is with me. Would I choose a different path if faced with the same choice that I was as a 14-year-old to smoke pot that first time and then become a heroin addict? Like, knowing what I know now, clearly I would choose a different path. But at the same time, God works all things to the good of those who love him. And because we experienced what we did, even though it was so hard and so awful and on two totally different ends of the spectrum, but now we are able to have this testimony that we have, and everybody's hard looks different. Maybe somebody's hard is that their spouse is going through a faith crisis and they are feeling that darkness. They're feeling alone, and they have to rely on the Savior's atonement. Or maybe it's their child has, some kind of medical thing. Everybody has something that they go through. And when we're able to turn to the Savior during these hard things, it can be transformative for our lives. And these hard things can be made into something beautiful.
I know when obviously because of that, I get a lot of phone calls from guys, mostly around the state, but I've had some calls from out of state too. But the ability for my wife and I to go see them and their wife and help them through it, and she's able to talk to the wife and say, yeah, I know you want to kill him, and that's totally normal, and knowing that there's somebody there that understands all the feelings that you're going through. I wasn't joking when I said how she didn't kill me, because that desire had to have been there. I was not a good person. I was not good to live with. I wasn't good to her. I wasn't good to the kids. I knew that I wasn't. I'd tell myself, what are you doing? And then it was just this whole, the devil and the angel on the shoulder, having this dialogue. And there were a couple of times where I would kind of peel back, and it was almost like I could watch that conversation happening, and like I'm watching a tennis match. Some of the times I'm looking at the devil's one and I'm going, yeah, that's a really good point. Or, yeah, that sounds a lot more fun, and went that route. But, just knowing that there are people out there that understand, that's where the lesson on empathy comes in, is that I can have empathy for somebody without going through what they've gone through, but looking at it from a gospel standpoint, or from a gospel lens, you can almost just picture what it is that they're going through. It's almost like you can feel it. You're not there to judge them or critique them or anything like that. It's just the message is, you can get through it, and I'll be here while you get through it, and I'll help you get through it. And that's the thing, is that I cannot believe how much better it is on this side of it. My wife and I are inseparable. That wasn't the case. Like would have a training or something like that, and it was like, well, I've got to travel, or I've got to go to this, or, me and the guys are going to this. And now we're together 24/7. I keep telling her all the time, this probably sucks for you, but it is really, really good for me, because I spent a little more than 20 years with that not being the case. We work out of the same office. Our desks are right next to each other. Everything that we do, if she works from home that day, I work from home because my job I can do from wherever. The stupid thing is that I could have had that all along. I could have had that 20 years ago, and I didn't. But there's an old Chinese proverb that says the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. It doesn't really matter what the past looks like or what has happened. Making that decision that today everything changes is the best decision that anybody can make. It doesn't matter if you've been away from the gospel for 50 years. Start going today and all that comes flooding back. It's really remarkable how those trials and the adversity really refiners fire is no joke.
Mm-hmm.
But coming out on the other end, I can't envision a time or a circumstance where I would turn my back on it again.
I just can't thank you enough for coming on here and sharing your story and sharing your testimony. I'm just amazed.
Well,
Thank you.
I appreciate you doing it. I mean, you've done a really good thing here. It helps a lot of people.
You went through what you went through, and it was so hard. And now look at what you're doing. And look at your testimony. And I think about the young men that you work with. I wish my son could be in that class with you because of your experience and what you've seen and what you know and the testimony that you have because of your experience on both sides.
Well, hey, come to the other end of the state.
Well, my son's only 4, but
Oh,
if you're still in that college when he's a little bit older, maybe I'll have to hit you up.
it's something wrong if I'm still there 10 years later. I don't know. Yeah, it's good, but it's a really good thing you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being a supporter of the Comeback Podcast and listening to our episodes. It would mean so much to us if you would like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It helps other people be able to find us, and we want to share this message to everyone.